Imagine waking up in a world where everyone believes the future can only get better. The streets are filled with music, new cars parade through the avenues, and the newspapers only talk about progress. It's 1929, the height of America's golden decade. You work on Wall Street, the heart of the modern dream. He has shares, credit in the bank, and a feeling of invincibility. The country is experiencing what they call endless prosperity. But what if I told you that in just a few days, will all this dream turn into despair? That the most optimistic decade in history would end in ruin, and that the world as you know it is about to collapse? The 1920s were a party. After the end of World War I, the United States became the center of the world economy. While Europe was still rebuilding, America was growing like never before. Between 1921 and 1929, American industrial production increased more than 60%. Unemployment was low, wages were rising, and new technologies were changing everyday life. Radio connected millions of people. Hollywood launched stars like Charlie Chaplin and Greta Garbo. The car, once a luxury, was now affordable to millions. The country seemed like an optimism machine, and where there was optimism, there was investment. Thousands of Americans began investing money in the New York Stock Exchange. Between 1924 and 1929, the total value of shares tripled. It seemed like money was sprouting from the ground, and who didn't have money to invest? Banks offered easy credit. With just a small down payment, it was possible to buy shares by borrowing the rest. It was what they called buying the margin. But no one realized that this mountain of debt was growing dangerously. The American economy was booming, but there were clear signs of imbalance. Agricultural production, for example, was already in crisis. Since the end of the war, grain prices had fallen, and thousands of farmers were in debt. The countryside suffered while the cities celebrated. Even so, credit remained easy. People bought stocks, houses, and even appliances with money that didn't exist. It was an economy driven by trust and illusion. Picture this. You buy a share for $100, but you only pay $10. If it goes up, the profit is huge. But if it falls, the debt remains. In 1929, almost 40% of operations on the stock exchange were carried out with borrowed money, and no one could stop. The headlines read, "The market just keeps going up." Even President Herbert Hoover said, "Prosperity is within our reach," but behind the scenes, some were already noticing cracks, overvalued companies, false profits, and a confidence that bordered on delirium. The castle was ready. All that was missing was a breeze. October 1929. Stock prices are beginning to fall timidly. Some investors decide to sell, others panic. October 24th, Black Thursday. In just a few hours, 13 million shares are sold. The trading floor turns into chaos. Men shout, "Push!" Tear papers. Phones ring non-stop. Brokers try to sell before the price drops further. But there are no buyers. Banks like Morgan Bank and the Chase National Tree to intervene, buying millions in shares to stabilize the market. For a moment, it seems to work, but the trust was already broken. 3 days later, the panic returns. October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday. More than 16 million shares are negotiated. The total market value falls by $40 billion, something equivalent to trillions today. The American dream turns to dust. Thousands of investors lose everything. Some, unable to cope with the collapse, throw themselves from the windows of the stock exchange buildings, stories that have become symbols of despair. The disaster did not stop at the stock exchange. Soon, the crisis spread to the banks. People were rushing to withdraw money, and the safes simply didn't have enough. More than 600 banks went bankrupt in just the first few weeks. The crisis crossed borders. Europe, dependent on American loans after World War I, collapsed as well. Germany, France and the United Kingdom faced recession and mass unemployment. In the United States, factories began to close. Companies like Ford Motor Company and General Electric cut thousands of jobs. By 1930, unemployment had already exceeded percent and would continue climbing until it reached 25%. Soup lines have become part of the urban landscape. Men with diplomas and suits huddled together, waiting for a hot dish. Entire families lost their homes and ended up living in makeshift shacks, called Hoovervilles in irony of President Hoover, who seemed powerless in the face of the crisis. Meanwhile, industrial production was falling. Almost half world trade has plummeted. Poverty has returned with a vengeance. The land of opportunity was now a broken country. Between 1930 and 1933, more than 5,000 banks closed their doors. The American economy has completely collapsed. The Great Depression was not just a financial crisis, it was a social, psychological and political crisis. Marriages declined. The birth rate plummeted. Many young people dropped out of school to try to help their families. In the countryside, the disaster was even greater. Droughts in the Midwest created the so-called Dust Bowl, dust storms that destroyed entire crops. Thousands of families left the countryside and migrated to California in search of work. The crisis spread. Like an epidemic across the world, Europe plunged into recession. In Germany, unemployment and despair have given rise to extremist rhetoric. In 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power, promising to restore national pride, fueled by poverty and economic chaos. The crash of 1929 did not directly cause World War II, but created the fertile ground for it to happen. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt assumed the presidency of the United States. The country is devastated, but he brings a promise: the New Deal, the new agreement. Roosevelt creates public works programs, regulates banks, establishes deposit insurance, and initiates major projects: dams, roads, schools, bridges. Millions of jobs are created. It also implements the Ley Glass-Steagall, separating commercial and investment banks to avoid new speculative bubbles, and creates the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, to supervise the financial market. It was the beginning of a new era. Capitalism has survived, but it has changed profoundly. State intervention in the economy began to be seen as necessary, something unthinkable before 1929. Little by little, confidence returned, and although the economy only fully recovered after World War II, the lesson was clear: a market without limits is a disaster waiting to happen. The stock market crash of 1929 was more than a financial collapse. It was an open wound in modern history, the moment the world realized that progress comes at a price. For a decade, blind optimism and greed created an illusion of wealth, but it only took one day of panic for everything to fall apart. And maybe, if you were there, I would also believe that nothing could go wrong, but history has shown what goes up too fast always ends up falling. Did you like this video? Then subscribe and leave a like.